Glenn Greenwald wrote a fantastic piece in The Intercept where he basically says, why is the media not speaking to any of the innocent torture victims? Now, they've had on Dick Cheney, former CIA Director Michael Hayden, George Bush's Attorney General, and James Mitchell, who's one of the psychologists who approved the torture. So these are all people who are fervently and viciously pro-torture. They've been all over the place on all the different networks, but none of the innocent torture victims have been. So how do you explain this? Well, Greenwald says, quote, whenever America is forced to confront its heinous acts, the central strategy is to disappear the victims, render them invisible. That's what robs them of their humanity. It's the process of dehumanization. That, in turn, is what enables American elites first to support atrocities and then, when forced to reckon with them, tell themselves that, despite some isolated and well-intentioned bad acts, they are still really good, elevated, noble, admirable people. That human interaction converts an injustice from an abstraction into a deeply felt rage and disgust. That's precisely why the U.S. media doesn't air those stories directly from the victims themselves, because it would make it impossible to maintain the pleasing fairy tales about who we really are. Yeah, that's certainly spot on in many ways. This reminds me of an issue that we were speaking about last week and something I tried to pontificate on endlessly. It's the idea that you are what you do. There is no such thing as being the good guy by definition. You're not just good and special and right and virtuous because you're you and you're a decent guy, so obviously everything you do is justified because you mean well. That's not an argument, because every single brutal empire throughout history all said that to themselves. None of them woke up in the morning and looked in the mirror and said, I'm a fucking douchebag. What we're doing here is really fucked up. All of them said, well, we are the people who are standing up for what is right and what is just. We're standing up for the superior system. We have the right moral value structure. So when we wage war, it's because we're waging a just war and because we're trying to civilize the savages who are the people that we're conquering. This is every single empire throughout history. None of them internally looked at their actions objectively and said, oh yeah, we were kind of fucked up, weren't we? That was pretty much fucked up. And the U.S. is falling guilty to the exact same thing. And actually, it's in overdrive. It's in hyperdrive. Because we're talking about a situation where somebody was given hypothermia and died. That person was innocent. Hypothermia torture. That's insanity. There was insect torture that was done. There was waterboarding, sleep deprivation, rectal feeding, which is just anal rape, except maybe a little worse because they're also pumping liquid food into your anus. People looked at that, including the former vice president of the United States, and said, no, we did the right thing because we prevented another 9/11. Now, remember, that's factually incorrect. That's not true. The CIA report says the exact opposite. We did not stop any attacks, and if anything, that emboldened our enemies because they hated us even more for how we acted. You're giving a recruitment tactic to the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and the people you hate. We did these things, and then these guys convinced themselves, well, it's okay because we meant well, we are the good guys, and that's the end of the conversation. And what Glenn Greenwald is saying is, motherfuckers, your actions define who you are as a person. Take our actions and just say that Iran did them or Russia did them, the exact same actions. If you read them in the newspaper, you would think, what a savage, barbaric, insane, backwards society that we're talking about here. It's no different when it's us. But what I think is the more important point in this conversation about why they only spoke to the torturers and not the people who were tortured is not that the media is necessarily complicit in some sort of grand cover-up to try to portray America as good, because I don't think it's that planned out, and I don't think it's that nefarious where they're all like, it's not like Don Lemon met with one of the CIA guys and was like, all right, how can I cover your ass? No. I think it has to do with just the structure, the way the media is structured, the way the system functions. It's all the different biases that come into play. I think it's the neutrality bias, which we've spoken about endlessly. The idea that in mainstream media, so if you're looking at CNN, if you're looking at any of the nightly news shows, if you're looking at the Sunday shows, they take to heart this idea of neutrality and balance. So what does that mean? It means you always debate the issue. There's always two sides to the issue. So even if it's torture, where there are no two sides, it's clearly against the Geneva Conventions, it's clearly against the Nuremberg Tribunal and international law, it's clearly against U.S. law and the Constitution, but hey, one side says it's real, so you have to debate it. You have two sides. So that's part of the problem, the neutrality bias, that they always buy into this paradigm of tell both sides, even when one side is torture and the moral degradation of America. It's also the obsession with access. It's the fact that all these guys want to know the people in power. They want to have a line of communication open with Dick Cheney and former CIA people and people close to George Bush because they want to get the big story the next time a big story comes out. And the only way to do that is to play patty cakes with these guys. So there's that problem, and then there's also just the problem of the pro-establishment bias. You don't get to be on CNN unless you're already pro-establishment. You would have never gotten there. You would have never gotten through the filter. You would have never been hired to be on air if they didn't think you were going to play ball to one extent or another. That's why you have Don Lemon on air. That's why you have Wolf Blitzer on air. That's why you have these people. They'll say the right things to always be kind to both sides and present everything as debatable, even when we're talking about torture, even when we're talking about drone strikes that kill grandmas and hit wedding processions. So these are the same people that meet politically powerful people on the cocktail circuit, and that they go to the same restaurants and they have the same friends and they go to the same country club. So they're friends. There are inherent biases in the structure of the system that leads to this grotesque outcome. You don't need a formal conspiracy to have the outcome that we had where the mainstream media covered torture in the most ridiculous, pathetic way. There is no formal conspiracy. There's no Illuminati, Bilderberg, Rockefeller bullshit that Alex Jones would tell you. The conspiracy is out in the open. The conspiracy is the structure of the system and the inherent biases, the neutrality bias, the obsession with access, and the pro-establishment bias.